So I want you to imagine, just for a second, being hunted by, well, basically the most powerful rigged monopoly on the entire planet.
Oh, yeah. A terrifying thought.
Right. Like you are a high-value target. You've completely been stripped of your status. Your entire network is just gone, and you flee into the desert with literally nothing but the clothes on your back.
Nothing. Zero resources.
Exactly. You cross this unforgiving wasteland, you're exhausted, you're starving, and the very first thing you do when you finally reach civilization, it isn't to lay low.
No, which is what anyone would normally.
Right. You don't hide. Instead, you instantly pick a fight with a local syndicate over a water well.
It's wild. It fundamentally defies every single conventional rule of survival. I mean, if you were reading this as a historical drama, it just makes absolutely no sense.
It makes zero sense.
Oh?
And honestly, that is exactly why we are just tossing out the conventional framing today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here.
So usually, when the story of Musa or Moses arriving in Madian is told, it's pitched as this really tender pastoral romance.
Right, it's like a Hollywood meet cute.
Yeah, like the weary refugee, the fateful meeting at the well, rescuing the damsels, and then, the eventual marriage. It's treated like this soft fable.
Which is such a disservice to the text.
It really is, because today we are looking at the source material, specifically Surah Al-Qasas, Ayat 18 through 28. And if you read the actual syntax of these events, we're not looking at a sentimental romance at all.
Not even a little bit. We are reading what is essentially a highly aggressive, meticulously detailed blueprint for dismantling corrupt societies.
Yes, a blueprint.
It really is a masterclass in structural engineering and sociology. The text is constructing this deliberate point-by-point counter-image to the collapsing, exploitative society of Pharaoh's Egypt.
It's a complete contrast.
Exactly. It's providing a functional diagnostic tool for civilizational survival. And I do not use those words lightly.
And that's why, for you listening, whether you are evaluating a corporate merger, analyzing the hiring practices of some tech startup in Silicon Valley, or maybe just trying to figure out why your own workplace feels so incredibly toxic.
Which, let's be honest, is a lot of workplaces.
Right, far too many. But this narrative actually provides the ultimate diagnostic metric for all of that.
Yeah.
It all comes down to how an organization structures its contracts and, crucially, who it chooses to elevate.
But to understand the cure, you have to deeply understand the disease first.
Yeah, so let's start there. Let's look at the anatomy of the rig system that Musa is actively fleeing.
Okay, so we begin right in the streets of Egypt. The narrative establishes Musa in a state of really high vigilance.
He's on edge.
Totally on edge. He is navigating a city where he knows the entire political architecture is hostile to him, and he witnesses an altercation.
A street fight, basically.
Right. Specifically, he sees a man from his own marginalized faction fighting with someone else. But the key detail here is that this isn't the first time.
He saw this exact same guy fighting yesterday.
Yes. He saw this exact same man involved in a chaotic street fight the day before.
And Musa has this really profound realization here, which I think a lot of people miss. He doesn't just rush in to blindly defend his guy.
No, he doesn't.
He looks at this oppressed man and essentially diagnoses him as a chaotic actor. I mean, he literally calls him a clear misguider.
Which is such a powerful phrase.
It is, because he recognizes that just being oppressed doesn't automatically make someone a stabilizing good force.
And that distinction is absolutely crucial because, Musa had previously made a vow. He swore never to be a backer of criminals.
Right.
Now, consider how a highly polarized, tribalized society actually operates. The baseline expectation is blind loyalty.
Well, 100% my team, right or wrong.
Exactly. If someone from your demographic, your political party, or your specific corporate department is in a fight, you back them up, period. You defend the tribe regardless of the objective facts on the ground.
Think about how a mafia family operates, or even, honestly, a corrupt corporate board.
Yeah, same mechanics.
Right. They create this insulated bubble where their high-earning executives or their loyal soldiers are basically immune to the rules.
They protect their own.
Yeah, like if a top salesman is creating a toxic environment or actively harassing junior employees, the HR department doesn't fire him.
No, they protect him because he brings in revenue.
Exactly. They pay off the victim or they bury the complaints. They create this safe haven for terrible behavior.
And the text actually has a very specific sociological term for this exact type of corrupt safe haven.
The Saban, right.
Yes, the Saban. It refers to a system of patronage where powerful figures blindly shield criminals of their own faction from the actual consequences of their actions.
It's institutionalized obstruction of justice.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And Musa, by refusing to back this chaotic fighter just because they happen to share a marginalized background, he is actively severing his own participation in that cycle of patronage.
Because, if you think about it, participating in that cycle doesn't just enable the crime, it fundamentally incentivizes it.
Oh, absolutely. It warps the whole system.
Like, if you are operating in an environment where you know for a fact your patron will bail you out, your risk calculation completely changes.
You become entirely reckless.
Yeah, you do whatever you want. And Lusa understands that defending a bad actor for demographic reasons is the exact same mechanism that allows Pharaoh's ruling cabinet to act with total impunity.
He recognizes the algorithm at play. And it's fascinating because when Musa refuses to play the game, the fighting man immediately turns on him.
He flips out?
He does. He gets incredibly defensive and actually accuses Musa of wanting to be a tyrant in the land. The specific Arabic word he uses there is Jabbar.
Right.
He says, like, do you want to kill me like you killed a soul yesterday? You just want to be a Jabbar.
So I want to pause on that word for a minute because Jabbar is one of those terms that gets so flattened in typical translation.
Oh, completely flat.
Yeah, we usually just read it as oppressor or tyrant. But the mechanical reality of the word is way more complex.
It's fascinating.
It literally translates to a bone breaker.
It does. But this is where the linguistic architecture of the text reveals its absolute genius, because the exact same root word for a bone breaker is also the word for a bone setter.
Wait, really?
Yes, the physician who applies a splint to a shattered limb to help it heal.
But those are functional opposites. How does a single concept encompass both the violent shattering of a bone and the medical healing of it?
Because the core mechanical concept isn't about destruction at all. It's about the application of overwhelming, immobilizing force.
Okay, break it down for me.
Think about the physical mechanics of it. A bone breaker uses applied force to shatter a healthy, functional structure.
Right.
That is the ultimate definition of tyranny. That is Pharaoh's system. The state utilizes its monopoly on violence to crush the weak, shattering their economic mobility, shattering their physical autonomy. Egypt was very much a bone breaker society.
Yeah, they use force to break you.
Yeah.
But a bone setter also applies overwhelming force.
Exactly. When an orthopedic surgeon sets a broken leg, they don't just gently suggest that the bone heal.
Right, they don't give it a pep talk.
No, they forcefully manipulate it. They apply a rigid cast. They forcefully restrict movement. They immobilize the limb.
So they use force, but the intent is totally inverted.
Yes. The intent and the target of the force are completely inverted. The force isn't used to destroy the healthy tissue. It's used to aggressively restrict the chaotic movement of the break so that the traumatized bone can actually knit itself back together.
Wow. That is an incredible way to view the function of a just state.
It really reframes everything.
It's the difference between, say, a regulatory body that crushes small businesses with arbitrary fines just to protect massive monopolies, so the bone breaker,
Right.
versus a regulatory body that aggressively enforces antitrust laws to restrict the monopoly, giving those small businesses actual room to breathe and grow,
Yeah.
the bone setter.
Precisely. In an oppressive system, the state crushes the people. But in a just system, the state acts as the splint.
It immobilizes the oppressor.
Yes, it restricts the freedom of the strong to prey on the weak. And the tragic thing here is that the man accusing Musa simply cannot comprehend that difference.
Because he's never seen it.
Exactly. He lives in a society where force is only ever used to oppress. So he sees Musa applying force, stepping in to stop a chaotic fight, and he immediately assumes Musa is just another bone breaker asserting dominance.
Because he literally has no mental model for a bone setter. He has never experienced force being used to stabilize and heal.
Never. And the harsh reality is, you cannot act as a bone setter in a society where the entire infrastructure is fundamentally designed to break legs.
The system will just reject you entirely.
It has to, which perfectly explains the very next event in the narrative, and it really highlights how the physical architecture of the city reflects the systemic rot.
Yeah, this part is fascinating. So immediately after this accusation from the fighter, the text notes that a man comes running from the farthest part of the city.
The phrase in Arabic is Aqsa al-Madina.
Right, and he runs this massive distance to warn Musa that the ruling cabinet is explicitly plotting his assassination. So why does the geography matter here? Like, why does the text explicitly state he came from the farthest part of the city?
Well, it is a profound observation on spatial sociology because ruling elites throughout history, they do not live among the general populace.
No, they insulate themselves.
They geographically isolate themselves. They do this to maintain an aura of awe, to mitigate their own physical risk, and, most importantly, to completely sever any emotional connection with the people they are governing.
Think about the British colonial era in India.
That's a perfect example.
The British administration, they didn't set up their homes in the bustling, chaotic local bazaars. They engineered what were called the civil lines.
Right, the cantonments.
Yeah. These were entirely separate residential zones, physically removed from the local towns by these massive buffer areas. They featured wide, sweeping roads, huge bungalows, heavy security. They created an entirely different physical reality.
And that physical distance actively engineers a psychological distance.
It has to.
Like, the local population wouldn't even see a high-ranking official on a normal day. They became these mythic, untouchable figures, and more importantly, the officials didn't have to look at the poverty or the struggle of the people they were taxing.
It fundamentally alters an elite's risk calculation and their capacity for empathy.
It zeroes it out.
It's basically the modern equivalent of the billionaire class retreating to, like, fortified bunker compounds in New Zealand.
Or the corporate C-suite taking a private elevator directly from the parking garage to the 50th floor.
Yes. When you are geographically and socially insulated like that, it is remarkably easy to sign a mandate laying off, say, 10,000 workers, because you don't ever have to look them in the eye in the company cafeteria.
The consequences of your decisions fall in a completely different zip code.
Exactly, and that is the dynamic of Pharaoh's Egypt. The architecture of the capital physically enforces the systemic inequality. The elites are out there in Aqsa al-Madinah, the farthest, most insulated, heavily guarded sector.
They are in the boardroom, plotting an execution.
Right, and when someone who is actually embedded in that perimeter catches wind of the assassination plot, he has to physically run a vast distance, crossing all those buffer zones from that insulated bubble back into the real, grimy world of the streets just to deliver the warning.
So Musa receives this warning, and he realizes in that moment that the system cannot be reformed from within. It is entirely rigged.
It's a lost cause.
It is. So he flees. And the text notes that as he escapes into the desert, he explicitly prays to be saved from the Zalimin.
Which is an interesting word choice.
It is, because he doesn't just ask to be saved from bad individuals. The term Zalimin refers to an unjust systemic order.
He is fleeing the actual architecture of oppression.
Exactly. Which brings us to the psychological state of a man who has just been violently ejected from the Matrix, essentially.
Yeah, Musa is a fugitive now.
Yeah.
He has lost his elite education, his royal network, his wealth, his security, everything. He walks into a totally hostile desert.
With nothing.
With nothing.
Yeah.
So he crosses the desert, he's desperate, he's severely dehydrated, and he stumbles upon a well in the region of Madian. And what does he find there?
This is where it gets brilliant.
He finds the exact same societal disease he just fled, replicated on a microscopic scale.
It's a perfect mirroring effect. He arrives at the water source. Water is a vital, life-sustaining asset, especially in the desert. And he just quietly observes the social dynamic around it.
He reads the room.
He reads the system. There is a group of strong, capable men shepherds watering their massive flocks, and standing off to the periphery, physically holding their animals back, are two women.
So he's looking at a self-contained microeconomy of oppression right there. You have the capital, which is the water. You have the dominant faction, which are the shepherds. And you have the marginalized faction, the women, who are representing their elderly father's estate.
The strong have monopolized the resource.
Yeah, and the weak are entirely blocked from the means of survival until the elites are completely finished and, generously decide to vacate the premises.
The underlying algorithm is identical to Egypt.
It really is.
In Egypt, Pharaoh and his cabinet monopolized the wealth and the labor, leaving the marginalized classes to scramble for scraps. Here, at the well, the shepherds have monopolized the water.
The scale is different, but the math is the same.
Right. The source of the power is different. It's brute physical strength here instead of a massive state military apparatus. But the economic reality is identical. The resource, philosophically, should be accessible to the entire community. But in a system completely devoid of justice, might makes right.
Is pure brute force economics.
Yes.
But okay, I see the analogy. But intervening at that well right then seems like a terrible tactical decision.
From a purely selfish standpoint,
Well,
sure.
like if he's a true systems thinker, a man who deeply understands the brutal reality of power dynamics, shouldn't he just be keeping his head down?
You would think so.
He literally has a bounty on his head. He's exhausted. Picking a fight with a group of strong locals over a water dispute that has absolutely nothing to do with him just looks, well, reckless. Does the text actually justify this, or is this just a classic impulsive hero complex moment?
It is the exact opposite of an impulsive hero complex.
Oh, so?
Because a systems thinker, someone who deeply understands the mechanical nature of justice, cannot compartmentalize oppression. The variable isn't the scale of the conflict. The variable is the dynamic of exploitation itself. When Musa sees the strong utilizing their monopoly to extract from the weak, it violates his core operating system. He can't unsee it.
It's like, imagine a senior cybersecurity architect who quits a massive tech conglomerate because their data practices are deeply unethical.
Okay, good analogy.
He goes off-grid, he walks into a local mom-and-pop coffee shop, and while he's waiting, he sees their point-of-sale system blatantly stealing customer credit card data.
Right.
He can't just buy his coffee and ignore it.
No, because he sees the broken code. He knows exactly how the exploit works.
Yeah, the scale is smaller, but the crime is the same.
Exactly. And what's absolutely crucial here is how Musa intervenes. He doesn't give a grand moralizing speech to the shippers.
He doesn't start a podcast about it.
No. And he doesn't incite a violent riot. He executes a purely functional rebalancing of the system.
He just does the work.
Yes. He steps in, utilizes his own physical capability to secure the resource for the marginalized party, waters their flocks, and then immediately retreats. He doesn't demand payment. He doesn't try to become the new boss of the well.
He acts strictly as the bone setter.
Precisely. He applies force merely to restrict the monopoly and allow the weak to function.
And then he just walks away. He sits in the shade, completely spent. And this is where the text introduces the mechanics of how a healthy system actually operates. We finally start to see the contrast to Egypt.
The pivot here is beautiful.
Musa utters this incredibly specific statement under his breath. He says, "My Lord, indeed I am, for whatever good you would send down to me in need."
And this is the formal introduction of a concept known as the law of requital, or, in the philosophical terminology, mukafat-e-amal.
Okay, unpack that.
It is essentially the engine of cause and effect in a rational universe.
So how does that work economically, like in a society?
Well, in a just functioning order, cause and effect run cleanly. It is a closed, predictable feedback loop. You input honest, productive labor into the system, and that system yields a proportionate, positive return.
Right.
Value created is value recognized and rewarded.
Which is, of course, the exact feedback loop that Pharaoh's rigged system had completely severed.
Yes, intentionally severed.
In a rigged economy, you can put in 80 hours of backbreaking labor a week. And because the system is designed to extract rather than reward, you stay in grinding poverty while the executive class reaps all the profit.
Because the connection between input and return is broken by coercion.
Right. Egypt was a severed loop.
But Madian, as we are about to see, is a society where the feedback loop is still highly functional. Musa just inputted high-value, entirely unselfish labor into the microeconomy of that well.
He solved a massive logistical problem for a local estate.
Exactly. And because he is now in a system that is actually capable of recognizing value, the system is about to respond.
And the response comes through one of the women he just helped.
Yes.
She approaches him to invite him back to her father's house. And the text describes her posture in a very specific way. It says she walks with haya.
Oh, this is a massive point.
It is, because historically, this is exactly where the narrative gets totally hijacked by cultural sentimentality.
It really does.
I mean, I have almost always seen haya translated as shyness or like bashfulness.
Yeah, that's the standard lazy translation.
Right. The image usually presented as this timid, blushing girl staring at her feet, practically whispering an invitation to this big, strong man.
And that translation is not just culturally conditioned, it fundamentally misrepresents the linguistic root of the word.
It totally strips the woman of her agency and turns what is actually a highly sophisticated negotiation into a cartoon.
It does. Let's look at the actual linguistics. The root of haya is the exact same root as the word hayat.
Which means
life.
Wait, really? The root word for this supposed shyness is actually life?
Yes, hayat, life.
So how do you get from life to shyness?
You don't. You have to think about it through a biological lens. What is the defining characteristic of a living organism versus, say, inorganic matter?
Okay, Biology 101.
Right. If you take a simple single-celled organism like an amoeba and you expose it to a sharp external stimulus like a drop of acid, or you physically prod it, what does it do?
It recoils. It gathers its mass together. It shrinks away from the threat to protect its nucleus.
Exactly. It exhibits an inherent self-preservation instinct. It draws boundaries. A dead cell doesn't react. A rock certainly doesn't react. But a living organism withdraws and gathers itself to preserve its structural integrity.
That makes total sense.
That biological reaction, that gathering in to protect the core, that is the foundational concept of Haya,
Oh, wow. That completely changes the scene.
doesn't it?
Yeah. So when the text says she approached him walking with Haya, it isn't describing a lack of confidence or a submissive blushing.
Not at all.
It is describing a woman exhibiting profound, dignified self-preservation.
Exactly. She is a living, thinking agent navigating a highly complex and potentially dangerous environment.
I mean, she is approaching a physically powerful, unknown male fugitive in the desert.
Right. She isn't blushing. She is maintaining strict situational awareness. She is actively protecting her boundaries, exhibiting absolute self-containment, and acting with complete dignity.
She is essentially acting as the lead negotiator for her father's estate here.
Yes, she is.
She was at the well. She identified a highly competent asset who successfully disrupted a local monopoly, and now she is initiating contact to bring that asset into their economic unit.
You don't send a timid, helpless person to do that.
No, you send someone with extreme competence and impeccable boundary control.
And notice the systemic response from Musa. He immediately recognizes and respects that dignity.
The clean feedback loop continues.
Exactly. Competence recognizes competence. Integrity recognizes integrity. He follows her back to the estate, which sets the stage for what is essentially the invention of the modern optimized HR protocol.
Yes, this next part is the ultimate diagnostic verse for organizational health. So Musa meets the father, he debriefs him on his escape from Egypt, and then the daughter steps in with her formal recommendation.
The pitch.
The pitch.
Yeah.
She says, "Oh, my father, hire him. Indeed, the best one you can hire is the strong and the trustworthy."
The Arabic terms there are al-Qawai and al-Amin.
Al-Qawai al-Amin, strength and trustworthiness, capability and integrity.
It is a brilliantly concise formula.
And it is universally portable. I mean, if you are hiring a chief operating officer for a multinational logistics firm, a lead programmer for an AI startup, or literally just someone to repair the transmission on your car, you need those exact two traits.
You cannot compromise on either.
Right. Because if they are highly competent, they are strong, they are Kwai, but they lack integrity, they will eventually exploit your business.
They'll optimize the system for themselves.
Exactly. They will embezzle, or they'll steal your intellectual property, or they'll crush your junior staff. But on the flip side, if they are incredibly trustworthy, they are amining but completely lack competence.
They will accidentally bankrupt you through sheer incompetence.
Yes. The protocol demands both.
It does. And what is equally vital here is what is entirely absent from her recommendation. This is where the contrast with the Egyptian system we talked about earlier becomes glaringly obvious.
Oh, right. Because in Egypt, your worth was determined by your lineage, your tribal affiliation, your political patronage.
Precisely. But look at what she says. She doesn't say, hire him because he has an impressive resume from the royal courts of Pharaoh.
Which he probably did.
He did, but she doesn't care. She doesn't say hire him because he belongs to our specific tribe or shares our specific religious background. There is zero mention of his race, his wealth, or his political connections.
It is a ruthlessly functional, meritocratic qualification.
Absolutely. Can he execute the labor? Yes, he is Kwai. Can we trust him with the assets? Yes, he is Amin.
I want to dig deeper into that concept of Amin, actually. Because just like Haya, it's usually just defined as honest. Like, oh, he won't lie on his timesheet.
Which is such a surface-level reading.
Right. But the implications are much wider than that, aren't they?
Much wider. The word Amin derives from the root for am, which translates to peace or security.
Security.
Yes. So when you integrate someone into your system who is truly Amin, you aren't just getting an honest worker, you are acquiring an asset that actively provides security to the entire ecosystem. You hire them, and the ambient anxiety of the organization drops. You don't have to micromanage their every decision. You don't have to worry about them creating toxic factions in the break room or maneuvering for political power within the company. They generate a localized zone of stability.
Think about the absolute destruction caused by a toxic genius in the workplace.
Oh, the worst kind of hire.
We've all seen this, right? A developer who writes brilliant code. They are off the charts quiet, but they are a fundamentally chaotic actor.
They lack the M.
Yes. They belittle junior staff, they hoard vital information just to make themselves irreplaceable, they pit managers against each other, they utterly destroy the peace of the office. And what happens? The productivity of everyone around them plummets.
Even though their individual output is high?
Exactly.
There is a brilliant historical corollary to this that really highlights the danger. During the early Islamic period, the Caliph Umar explicitly warned against two specific profiles in leadership.
Oh, I know this one.
He warned against the strong but corrupt and the honest but weak. He recognized that both profiles inevitably destroy the system just through different mechanisms.
Let's break those down.
Sure. The strong, corrupt leader utilizes their vast competence to optimize the exploitation of the system for their own gain. They are the bone breakers.
Right.
But the honest, weak leader allows the system to collapse into chaos because they lack the capacity to manage it or enforce boundaries. They have the right intentions, but they can't execute. The survival of an organization absolutely requires the synthesis of both traits in a single node.
Which is exactly what Musa represents.
Yes.
So she makes this perfect, data-driven recommendation based purely on Kwai and Amin. And the father, acting as the executive of the estate, offers the contract. And this contract, I mean, this is the complete structural antithesis to the economy Musa just fled.
It is the counterimage to forced labor.
He says, I wish to wed you to one of my daughters on the condition that you serve me for 8 years.
Now, look at the exact phrasing that follows.
Right, because after laying out the terms, the father adds, but I do not wish to make it hard on you. If you complete 10 years, it will be of your own free will.
That phrase right there is everything.
Let's compare the mechanics of that statement to Egypt. Because in Egypt, labor is extracted through arbitrary violence.
The state owns your body.
Exactly. The state owns your body and your time. You work in the brickyards until you die, and you have absolutely no agency over the terms of your existence.
But what the text is presenting in Madian is the irreducible DNA of a legitimate, just transaction. Let's break down the actual syntax of the contract.
Okay, let's do it.
First, there is defined labor. 8 years of specific service managing the flocks. It's not an open-ended demand.
Clear expectations.
Yes. Second, there is a defined proportionate return. Marriage, integration into the community, and maintenance.
A fair wage, essentially.
Exactly. And third, and this is the absolute linchpin of a free society, there is absolute consent and clarity.
I do not wish to make it hard on you.
Yes, it is presented as an option. Musa is standing there as a desperate refugee. He has nothing.
He's incredibly vulnerable.
The father could so easily leverage Musa's vulnerability to extract predatory terms. He could have said, work for me forever, or I'll just turn you in to the Egyptian authorities.
Which is what a bone breaker would do.
Exactly. But he doesn't. He lays out transparent terms, offers a baseline of 8 years with an optional extension to 10, and gives Musa the actual space to accept or decline without threat.
And that is the fundamental demarcation line between an economy of free, sovereign individuals and an economy of slaves.
It is the core of systemic justice.
And Musa accepts. He seals the deal with a statement of profound clarity. He says, that is between me and you. Whatever of the two terms I complete, there is no injustice to me. It's an airtight, mutually beneficial agreement.
It is, but there is another crucial sociological layer to this contract that almost always goes unnoticed, and I think it's one of the most powerful points in the text.
So the family structure aspect.
Yes. This agreement doesn't just provide Musa with employment. It structurally engineers an independent economic unit.
You're talking about the implicit critique of the joint family financial structure. When I first grasped this, it completely changed how I view economic autonomy.
It's a very sharp critique of traditional cultural structures that systematically strip young adults of their financial autonomy.
Which is still a huge issue today in many parts of the world.
It is. In many historical and even modern cultures, there is a model of forced joint family financial hoarding. A young couple marries, and instead of forming a new independent household, they are entirely absorbed into a massive, centralized family structure.
Right.
The patriarch or matriarch controls all the capital, makes all the major financial decisions, and the son and his new wife possess basically zero independent financial agency.
And the mechanics of that system are inherently destructive.
Highly destructive.
Because the young wife is often reduced to unpaid domestic labor for the larger extended family. The son has no control over the wealth his own labor generates.
Right, he's just working for the collective without equity.
Exactly. It breeds deep resentment. It completely stifles innovation because the younger generation has no capital to experiment with, and it's fundamentally built on domestic exploitation, masquerading as familial loyalty.
Precisely. And the narrative here implicitly rejects that centralized model entirely.
How so?
Because Madian's contract guarantees the worker his own autonomy. When Musa marries the daughter, he isn't just vanishing into the father's estate as a nameless, uncompensated gear in the machine.
He's not just absorbed.
No, the contract establishes clear boundaries. He is performing a highly specific service for a specific duration with a specific guaranteed reward that allows him to build his own life.
It's basically arguing that a healthy macroeconomy is completely impossible without healthy microeconomies.
You can't have one without the other.
Right. If you want a society of capable, innovative, free citizens, you cannot have family structures that crush individual economic agency. A patriarchal family that hoards wealth and suppresses the independence of its children is, at its core, just a miniature version of Pharaoh's state.
That is the exact parallel. A system that normalizes coercion and lack of consent at the domestic level will inevitably produce a state that normalizes coercion at the national level.
Wow. Okay, this brings us to the grand synthesis. When you take the entire architecture of this narrative, the bloody streets of Egypt, the microeconomy of the well in Madian, the transparency of the contract, and you zoom out, the contrast is staggering.
It's an engine of pure reason.
It really is deliberately engineered to isolate a single variable.
Yes.
Look at Musa as a data point. In
Yeah.
Egypt, he was labeled a terrorist. He was a hunted enemy of the state, an outlaw, a massive problem that the ruling cabinet deemed necessary to assassinate.
He was a threat to the system.
But you take that exact same human being, with the exact same skill set, the exact same temperament, and the exact same moral compass, and you drop him into the microeconomy of Madian. And suddenly,
He is the most highly valued asset in the entire region.
exactly,
Yeah.
he's the ideal hire, the perfect son-in-law, the stabilizer of the local economy.
So what is the rational conclusion there?
Well, the man did not change.
No. His capacity for labor didn't change. His integrity didn't change.
System
The
change.
variable is the system. This is the core thesis the text is forcing us to confront. A toxic, rigged system actively suppresses and criminalizes competent, honest people because their very existence is a lethal threat to the patronage networks.
Oh, that is so true. I mean, if you are highly competent, if you are quiet and possess unshakable integrity, you're a min inside a corrupt corporate monolith, you aren't going to get promoted.
No, you are going to get fired.
Exactly, because you are the guy who refuses to fudge the quarterly earnings report. You are the one who refuses to cover up the safety violations on the factory floor.
Your integrity is a lethal threat to the Salfon, the safe havens of corruption we talked about earlier.
The system must eject you to survive.
But a just system, a society actually operating on the principles of Madian, is actively hunting for those exact traits.
They reward it.
Yes, it engineers an environment where Qawi and Ahamin are the sole metrics for elevation. Egypt operated on coerced labor, arbitrary status, and the violent suppression of boundaries. Madian operates on negotiated value, merit, and absolute consent.
So the permanent principle here, the thesis we have to walk away with, is that justice is not a sentiment.
It is not.
Justice is not a vague feeling of goodwill or a charity campaign or a nice poster in the break room.
Justice is a highly specific contracting protocol. It is a systemic algorithm.
It is competence-based selection combined with consensual, clearly specified terms. That is the entire formula. And that is why this text is so fiercely relevant today.
The wells, the flocks of sheep, the desert, that's all just period dressing.
Right, it's just the set design of the Bronze Age. But the protocol itself, the absolute necessity of Qawi plus Amin, the demand for clear consent entirely devoid of coercion, that is a perfectly portable technology.
You can take this exact diagnostic tool and overlay it onto a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
Are they allocating funding based on a founder's demonstrable technical skill and ethical integrity? Or are they allocating millions based on aggressive networking, pedigree, and the shared delusion of a charismatic fraud?
We've seen plenty of the latter recently. You can overlay it onto a Wall Street merger, too. Is the acquisition built on transparent valuation and mutually agreed upon terms that actually benefit both entities? Or is it a hostile takeover driven by a massive monopoly leveraging its capital to shatter a smaller competitor?
A bone breaker asserting dominance.
Yes. You could apply to your local school board, your city council, or the factory down the street.
Are the workers operating under clear contracts with defined hours and proportionate pay, or are they subjected to arbitrary off-the-clock demands and the silent threat of termination if they don't comply?
The diagnostic works at literally every scale.
It does. And this reveals the ultimate architectural purpose of this specific chapter in Musa's life. Think about his grand narrative arc. He isn't going to stay in Madian forever.
Right, this is just a phase.
He is eventually going to be tasked with the most terrifying mission imaginable. He has to walk back into Egypt.
He has to go back to the bone breakers.
Yes, he has to stand in the boardroom of the most powerful empire on earth, look Pharaoh in the eye, and dismantle that tyrannical system.
He has to go back into the belly of the beast.
But logically, you cannot ask a man to diagnose and cure a terminal disease if he has never once in his life seen a healthy patient.
Oh, that is a great way to put it.
The Surah meticulously constructs this desert exile not as a punishment, but as a mandatory training ground. Musa is forced to live inside a perfectly just, functioning transaction.
He has to physically experience it.
He has to internalize the actual mechanics of a healthy economy.
He has to know what it feels like when honest labor actually yields a proportionate return. He has to experience the dignity of a contract built on mutual consent, rather than the terror of state coercion.
Because when he finally goes back to confront the bone breakers of Egypt, he cannot just be an angry revolutionary who only knows how to tear things down.
We've seen how that ends historically.
It just creates a new tyranny. He has to know exactly what he is fighting for. He possesses the blueprint of a functioning society.
He is a systems engineer who has seen the optimized code, and now he is returning to fix a corrupted mainframe.
Exactly.
That completely blows the traditional reading out of the water. We have moved from this soft pastoral fairy tale to a literal masterclass in organizational health. We've seen the pathology of Egypt, the monopolies, the patronage cycles, the severed feedback loops.
And we've seen the cure in Madian.
The dismantling of monopolies, the clean protocol of Kwawai and Amin, and the absolute non-negotiable necessity of consent.
It is a living diagnostic tool, completely stripped of all sentimentality, focused entirely on the rational mechanics of civilizational survival.
And so, to you, the listener, we leave you with this diagnostic power. You can use this lens on the structures you navigate every single day, because an organization, a society, even a personal relationship is ultimately defined by the health of its contracts.
Exactly. Who is getting elevated? Are they competent and secure, or are they chaotic actors protected by patrons?
Are the terms of your own labor truly consensual, or are they coerced?
It's an uncomfortable audit to perform, honestly. We so easily recognize the grand pharaohs of history or the massive corporate monopolies in the news, but the algorithm of oppression scales down to the microscopic level.
It scales down to our own lives.
It does. Take a hard, rational look at the digital agreements you click accept on without reading, bound by tech monopolies that extract your data without any proportionate return.
Think about the unwritten contracts in your own office, the silent expectation to answer emails at midnight, the subtle pressure to cover for a toxic manager just to maintain your own fragile security.
The localized saw pawn in your own department.
Exactly. Evaluate the structures you actively participate in. Ask yourself, is the feedback loop closed? Is your input yielding a fair return? Are the terms actually clear and consensual?
Or are you caught in a rigged game of arbitrary demands and subtle coercion?
In the end, this text acts as an incredibly high-resolution X-ray. It strips away all the cultural noise and shows you the exact skeletal structure of the systems you inhabit.
The bone breakers and the bone setters.
So the final question you really have to ask yourself, looking at your own career, your own organization, your own life, is simply this. Are you operating in the healthy, consensual reality of Madian, or are you just surviving in Egypt?